In the early 2000s, the Los Angeles Lakers had an unquestioned spot as the top dog in the NBA. They did manage to get real competition from the Western Conference, which always made the playoffs interesting for them, of course, outside of 2001. But whenever they got to the actual finals, the Eastern Conference didn't come close to having a team that could withstand the Lakers. Indiana, Philly, and New Jersey would all fall victim to the Lakers in 6 games for Indiana, 5 for Philly, and a clean sweep against the Nets. But what if that was different? What if there was a team in the East that could match LA, featuring the only other big on Shaq's level at that point, and the only other 2 guard on Kobe's level? Well, that did almost happen. The reason it didn't? Because Doc Rivers made a really big mistake. Before we get into today's video, I want to talk about our sponsor, Manta Sleep. Manta makes excellent sleep masks that will dramatically improve your experience sleeping. Now, me personally, when I think of something like a sleep mask, I'm afraid of the discomfort that could potentially be associated. If something like this is not designed primarily with comfort in mind, at least for me, that will render it useless. But Manta is well aware of this and has designed their masks primarily with comfort in mind. Each mask is extremely adjustable to your preferences. They are made from soft and breathable materials, and it doesn't apply any pressure on your actual eyes. And dependent on what's most comfortable to you, you can decide between their many different masks that accommodate a variety of needs. There's a cool mask designed to distribute a cooling feeling, so if you're someone like me that sweats in your sleep, that would be ideal. There is a steam mask meant to alleviate dry eyes. There is a weighted mask if you're looking for more pressure, and there's the ones that I got, which is the Manta Sleep Sound, which includes Bluetooth headphones, which is great for me because I like to listen to white noise while I sleep, of course, to drown out the dark thoughts and many regrets. So if you're looking to improve your sleep, check out Manta's sleep masks with the link in the description, and make sure to use my code RUSTY for 10% off of your order. Again, that is code RUSTY for 10% off of your order. Thank you to Manta for sponsoring this video. In the 2000 offseason, there was a lot of major talent available, and the Orlando Magic decided they were going to strike while the iron was hot. Following them completely fumbling Shaq's free agency and watching Penny Hardaway's career slowly but surely be derailed by injury, the team was looking for a new, fresh image, one with more talent than they had just a few years ago. The team had 3 major targets. The biggest stretch among them was Tracy McGrady out of Toronto. T-Mac had been in the shadow of his cousin Vince in Toronto, but had shown stretches that season where he showcased genuine star potential. One stretch in particular to close the year featured a 20-game run where Tracy averaged 18 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3.4 stocks. While McGrady was interested in building something in Toronto with Vince, he had a larger interest in the potential of having a more prominent role in Orlando. The extra money did not hurt either. So they landed Tracy McGrady. The next pillar to fall would be Grant Hill. One of the most versatile wings in the entire league, Grant could score the ball, rebound super well, and was a really talented on-ball creator for himself and his teammates. He averaged 21, 8, and 6 with the Pistons, but those numbers did not come with much winning. They would win 54 games one time with him, but every other year besides for that, the Pistons ranged from underwhelming to awful. As a result, he was looking for a change of scenery as well, and Orlando was able to land him. But the biggest name that they were interested in, and easily the hardest to land, would be Tim Duncan. Tim had won a championship with the Spurs just 2 seasons ago, but his future in San Antonio did feel fairly up in the air. Duncan had been drafted to an older roster that was only bad enough to get the first overall pick because of an injury to their superstar center David Robinson, but going into the 2001 season, David was going to be 35 years old. Outside of that, key contributors like Avery Johnson, Terry Porter, Sean Elliott, Jaren Jackson, and Mario Elie were all over the hill as well. It seemed like if Tim stayed with the Spurs, he would be left in the position of being an incredible superstar talent surrounded by incredible mediocrity forced to carry that team. And having the Kobe and Shaq Lakers having just won their first championship and looking to dominate the West for for years to come. The prospect of actually making it to the finals with the talent that he would have around him, it would be a daunting task. And we know now that for the next few years, the years that Duncan would have alternatively been in Orlando, this is exactly what would happen. In 2001 and 2002, the Spurs would win 58 games apiece, and they would win 60 in 2003, all while Duncan won back-to-back MVPs in 02 and 03. Now, he still did manage to carry the Spurs to a championship, as daunting of a task as that was. And when I say carry, please bear in mind, I believe Tim Duncan's 03 run arguably has the case for the strongest carry job ever achieved for a championship team. That said, there was obviously a lot of adversity for that. Luckily, Duncan was such a transcendent talent that he managed to pull this off, not only without a player who would make an all-star team, but without even a player that would average more than 15 points per game. So going to Orlando, having one proven star teammate, another guy in T-Mac who was very much seeming to have that potential, it was a lot more compelling of a situation than what the Spurs had to offer at the moment, and seemingly a lot more winning of a situation as a result. Now obviously Duncan would go on to win 4 championships from this offseason going forward. The one in 03 as I previously mentioned, but the team would also draft Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, which provided him the help necessary to win without pulling off a miracle level carry job. But of course, Tim did not know that would happen in 2000. While I understand why now it would seem insane for Duncan to consider leaving the Spurs, at the time it very much made sense. And because of how much sense it made, Duncan was pretty much on board, which if this had happened would have been completely unprecedented. Signing 3 top free agents in the same offseason would not happen like this until a decade later with the Big 3 Heat, and at least in that case, Wade was already in Miami. This team from the fans' perspective would have pretty much completely come out of nowhere, being a completely different roster from the year prior. Before we talk about why this didn't happen, first I just want to live in this fantasy for a little bit. Let's actually ponder what this Magic team would have looked like with Tim Duncan. Tracy McGrady immediately broke out as one of the best scorers in the NBA at the age of 21, putting up 27 points per game in his first year in Orlando. Now, of course, that number wouldn't have been as high if Duncan was there, but that showcases the level of scoring talent Tracy clearly had, and I'm quite confident he could have scored over 20 a game one way or the other. Now, Grant Hill would unfortunately be a complete bust for Orlando, as he sustained an injury 4 games into the year that would lead to a domino effect of other injuries which ruined his career. Now, we can hypothesize that Grant maybe wouldn't have had these injuries, you know, butterfly effect and all that, but with or without Grant, I think Duncan and T-Mac alone are enough to be the top dog in the East for years to come. Tim and Tracy as a 1-2 punch on offense would look very similar to Kobe and Shaq, and of course Tim would have the defense held down. That's not to mention Tracy being a much better defender than history has given him credit for. And to make even more perfect, the players around these two would have worked really well. There was another good on-ball creator in Darrell Armstrong, who was a good high-volume 3-point shooter and a 7 assist per game level playmaker. Mike Miller, who had just been drafted by Orlando, was of course a lights-out shooter. He actually won Rookie of the Year this season. There was a really solid defensive and rebounding 4 in Bo Outlaw, who would help Duncan hold down the paint, and Pat Garrity would provide versatility off of the bench as a 40% 3-point shooter at power forward. This team would have won the East every single year for the foreseeable future, at least up until the 04 Pistons, and I think definitely it's possible it could have gone well beyond that. And this would easily be the biggest threat to the title that the Lakers would face, at least, you know, at their strongest. In terms of big men that genuinely bothered Shaq on both ends of the floor, Duncan probably only comes second place to Hakeem Olajuwon, maybe third to Dennis Rodman. And for Tracy, Kobe routinely cited him as his most difficult matchup, calling him the toughest guy he has ever played against. For a few years, Tracy genuinely had a case for being just as good as Kobe, arguably even better, so the duo of T-Mac and Duncan would have been perfect to match up with Kobe and Shaq. So with all that said, why did this not come to be? Well, according to Grant Hill, while at dinner with the players who were going to be signing with Orlando, as well as front office members and Doc Rivers, the newer and going to be the team's head coach, I believe he was only in his second year as a head coach, Tim's girlfriend asked Doc if players' girlfriends and wives would be allowed on the team plane. Now, this is something Duncan had been doing with his girlfriend and the Spurs, but it was not something that was really universal around the league. For the most part, it didn't happen. And because of this, Doc Rivers said, no, it's a business trip. It does not happen. I don't allow that. According to Grant, the body language of Duncan's girlfriend and really the energy at the table as a whole completely shifted. Now, as much as we all love to dunk on Doc Rivers, I don't know if he deserves a ton of flack for this. He probably would have made the exception if he was aware of just how much of an issue it would end up being. And I think as much criticism as this may deserve, maybe his tone was especially like suggesting it just was not going to happen, but one way or the other, I think if Doc knew this would lead to not landing Tim Duncan, he would have compromised, let's be real here. And ultimately, a lot of the blame can be put on Tim Duncan for just not communicating better. This is why the title of this video, whether it changes or not, is the dumbest what if ever, because this is some seriously like dramatically league altering shit. Everything that we know now would be entirely different if this team came to be, but it didn't, over a dumb rule that probably could have been resolved with the conversation. Like, that's just stupid. That's just the dumbest way that this incredible thing didn't happen. Luckily for Duncan, staying in San Antonio worked out just fine. He'd win 4 more championships along with 2 MVPs. He'd go down as one of the greatest players of all time, and he did that with just one franchise, which, as we all know, earns you a real badge of honor in terms of how people talk about your legacy. His legacy would look quite different if he had left San Antonio by the end of his 3rd year, even if he would have still probably hoisted a few trophies in Orlando. Things did not quite work out for the other 2 parties of this big 3 that never was, however. In fact, Tracy McGrady describes not getting Duncan as a nightmare. As I previously mentioned, Grant Hill's career ran short pretty much the moment that he signed with the Orlando Magic, and for Tracy, while he got the wish of having his own team completely sucked. While he put up major scoring numbers and would go down as one of the most talented players to have ever played the game, that acknowledgement comes with the asterisk that he never ever made it out of the first round. Something that would surely not be the case with Duncan beside him in his prime. And man, I really feel like we got robbed of what could have been some of the most classic finals matchups of all time. Kobe and Shaq versus McGrady and Duncan, man, that shit would have been excellent. I'd say there's a good chance that would be the best final series ever. But instead, Kobe and Shaq absolutely dominated a helpless Sixers and Nets team, and Tracy got to average a lot of points on some 40-win teams. It's a damn shame. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, but that is it. Goodbye.